Hi, I'm Jeff, the SP Spaz, back with part two of Down with the Scholarchy. And where did I leave off? Education. I think the inherent difference here really is the definition of education as being this kind of short-sighted thing of college degrees, and thus somehow should grant you more power in the government. The thing is that getting a college degree does not actually mean that you are inherently more educated. It means that you're good at specific skill sets that are necessary in order to obtain the degree. So, in a lot of cases, that may be memorization of particular facts. It may be particular biases that college professors or people that were in charge of determining your status in the university have. There's a whole lot of things that go into college degrees and the process in which they're obtained that have nothing to do really with learning as a whole. They have to do with learning specific things that are useful towards obtaining that goal. But there are plenty of people that can learn the things necessary to obtain a college degree that can still be completely clueless when it comes to what they do after college, and can in fact be behind people that did not get a college degree depending on the situation. So that to me is just one example of the disconnect. There is this idea that education somehow inherently means, the more college degrees you have, that somehow means you're this higher form of human being that is this educated person versus the lazy, uneducated Walmart worker that Mike tried to, this class he created. He said things like a more worldly. Yeah, if you spend 4 years at the University of South Alabama getting a degree in women's studies versus somebody who spent that same 4 years traveling around the entire world and actually spending time in other cultures and getting to know people. And I would think that the second example of that would be the more worldly person, rather than the one who, sat around listening to people drone on about people in other places. The person that actually went there and experienced it. I have a friend from high school that she spent some time in the Peace Corps and traveled, for an entire year in all kinds of different places in the world. And I would certainly consider her more worldly than somebody who had studied that in a classroom for several years. So I think that's kind of another pretty ridiculous assertion. And then here was another funny part. Then when he starts talking about, well, people who go on after bachelor's degree and they get masters or they get doctorates, they spend a lot of time with other people that are getting these advanced degrees, and thus they, somehow they form this collective of higher, intelligence, education, and this nice little basically group that reinforces, whatever it is that this specific skill set of doing this. It may reinforce the same tired old ideas, but because you're with other people that feel the same way you do about this, then somehow that's beneficial to you. Again, just way off base. And then he went and took another shot at people who work at certain jobs and said people working at Taco Bell. The thing is that somebody working at Taco Bell can have retained a tremendous amount of knowledge that's actually useful towards life. The things they have to do in their job, the things with their family. He mentioned something in the video about like people getting good at these few things that they need to do in life, as if this somehow was like a disparaging thing. Like somehow being good at at life skills is like a thing to mock or degrade, but knowing about a bunch of books written thousands of years ago is somehow a higher achievement. And that to me is just so backwards that I can't even fathom what it's like to live in that universe where you sit back on your throne of intellectualism and say, oh, well, I may not know how to turn on a faucet, but at least I've read Kierkegaard. I mean, that's just a bizarre way of looking at things to me. Um, so yeah, odds are, the average person at Taco Bell might actually have more useful knowledge than somebody who happens to have a degree in, underwater basket weaving from Caltech or whatever the case may be. Um, okay, and then he got into a totally different area where it almost kind of veered off of the whole education thing, but he talked about the concept of rights. Of course, the funny part was he said, well, this is where it's going to get controversial, as if all the stuff he had said up to that point, basically insulting a huge majority of the people in the country, wasn't controversial. Um, but what he demonstrated was, he expressed something in terms of the definition of rights that obviously a lot of people agree with. Uh, but I believe he and all of the people who do agree with that have a fundamental misunderstanding of what rights means. Um, he said the purpose of rights is to demand that a need get met. That's not only not the definition of right, it's almost the opposite of right. And the U.S. was founded by people who believed in liberty and individual rights, which is almost the exact opposite. It's not demanding someone else meet your needs. It's the only demand it makes is that everyone else leaves you alone to do what you want to do. And it's exactly the opposite. It's saying that no one has the right to demand their needs be met by someone else because you don't have the right to control anyone else. Um, Everyone has their own free will and their liberty to decide what they want to do with their life and should not be told, no, you have to do something for somebody else. And that's been a fundamental misunderstanding and leads to things like in the recent discussions where people described, they kept repeating the phrase that healthcare is a right. Well, somebody who says that has a fundamental misunderstanding of what rights are, because health care implies that someone is taking care of you, but in doing this. Therefore, inherently, if you say health care is a right, then what you're saying is somebody else should be forced to do something for you against their will. Because if it's voluntary, then it's not a right. It's just somebody deciding to use their freedom to help you. So, by definition, a right cannot be anything that forces someone to do something against their will. Therefore, health care cannot be a right, just like education isn't a right. Now, you have the liberty to pursue your own methods of education, but no one should be forced to have to educate you. So that's kind of the a big deal there is, I felt like, watching this, that, the great thing about America is we have free speech. We have the right to advocate for changing the whole system of government in the U.S., and our federal government has changed tremendously from when it was founded, from a foundation of the rights being, protected from the government. The idea of a lot of the whole thing was the people that came to America from Europe and other places came from oppressive regimes that they were trying to escape from, who basically they had no freedom under those systems to do what they wanted to do because everything was controlled by either a monarch or a dictator or some kind of for instance, like an educational elite, something like that. Was had all the power, and they didn't have the power, so they founded the U.S. as being a place where inherently, as an individual, you should have individual rights and power, and not be able to just have anyone come in and take it away anytime they feel like it. That was the whole concept of the foundation of this country. And the country's obviously grown tremendously and brought in a whole lot more people, but the descendants of a lot of those people in, I think, a lot of ways take for granted, all of the sacrifices and the work it took to get to that point, and are choosing to use that freedom by reverting back to a system of, thinking, well, the government's purpose is there to rescue me from my problems or to give me things. Exactly the kind of concept that Mike was talking about when he said that rights were a demand for a need to be met, which is completely false and a distortion of what that entire concept is about. It's about individuality and liberty. It's not about demanding people do things for you. Then the next thing he talked about was things like a creationist museum being somehow an example of anti-intellectuals having too much power in the country. So then I started to wonder, well, how far is he going with this? First, he wants to restrict the voting powers of people that he doesn't think belong in intellectual elite class. But now he doesn't even want them to like build things. Like you're not. I mean, next thing you know is you're going to say, well, churches are inherently anti-intellectual because they're they're some kind of cult thing. So they shouldn't be able to build churches either. Like, I mean, where does it stop when it comes to like what you think people, should and shouldn't have the power to do? I mean, it's so it started to get almost in scary territory there because regardless of what you feel about a creationist museum, people have the right to make one of those if they want to, and they should. You have the right to make a museum of belly button lint if you want to, and if people want to pay to see that, then they should be able to. And that's again what it's all about with freedom. You decide what you want for yourself, not try to somehow control other people's lives and decide, well, what somehow is intellectual enough to qualify as being valuable in this society. I mean, that's just kind of a preposterous assertion. And the U.S. government, like I said, was designed on liberty, was designed to be representative. The people that went to Washington as representatives, that word actually means something. It's supposed to be you represent the average person or the common people of your district. Now, this is an area where you can, right now say, well, Jeff, already this isn't the case. People with the money, get more power. I understand that. Believe me, I agree that that's bad and it's a flawed system. But the point is that the idea is that it's not supposed to be representative of only a certain class of people within the district or location that the person is coming from to represent those people in Congress. But just because you change it to an educational elite versus a wealthy elite doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be any better, or that it's not going to be more representative. That's for sure, because the average person within a certain district may not be someone who has advanced college degrees. So, in fact, more often than not, you're going to have more people that are, I don't know, waiters and waitresses working at Taco Bell and Walmart and all these things that Mike tried to, kind of disparage on the video. These things are essential to, construction workers. I mean, I'm sure Mike enjoys being able to drive on roads and enter buildings and things that all had to be built by someone. Some of these low-class workers that probably don't have advanced college degrees had to work on that and worked really hard on it. And if you try to demean and degrade and take the power away from the little people, so to speak, they might not feel like building you buildings and roads and things like that anymore. They might just say, you know what, you want to have your own little intellectual paradise? Well, then you build stuff yourself, and we'll see how far that gets you. And again, the point of leaving Europe and all these other oppressive regimes that people lived under, the English king and everybody else's, they wanted to get away from a society that was that if you're in the right family or you have the right piece of paper or you have the right status, somehow that gives you more power. The idea that no matter what you do, you contribute value to American society and thus have that individual representation and have one vote that you can use or choose to not use. That's another thing is I know plenty of college graduates that don't vote. And some that do, that they may vote, but they don't know what they're talking about. They don't watch or listen or read anything that has to do with the policies. They spout things that don't make any sense. I remember a particular person I talked to in 2008 who said she was voting for Obama because he's for the poor and McClain is for the rich. That was her reasoning for, and yes, this was a college graduate. So when I hear that sort of thing and the kind of ignorance that comes from plenty of people who have college degrees, this idea that somehow they should have more power to vote than me because I dropped out of college is ridiculous. I didn't drop out of college because I somehow, it was more about inspiration than it was laziness. I'll admit to laziness, but it's the kind of memorization and the kind of ability that is necessary to succeed in college is something that I don't have a high level of, but I have a very high level of retaining a lot of information that's useful in many different ways. And to disparage me or anyone else who's in that situation because we don't have the piece of paper that says we graduated from University of South College of the Blind doesn't mean that our contribution to society is invaluable and that somehow we should have our vote diminished versus people that don't pay any attention and don't even care about the government, politics, or anything that's going on, but yet have that college degree, so somehow they should get a higher vote. And I know part of what Mike said in the original video was that he thought, well, if we had this system, it would encourage a couple of things. One, more people to try to get college degrees because they wanted to have this power, and that two, the people that did have degrees would pay more attention because they knew they would have more power. And so it would be this change, this sea change in terms of the way people looked at it in formal education. But that is the one aspect where, I can't openly dispute that that wouldn't happen, but it does seem very idealistic to say that somehow that would be accomplished by it. It seems that there's a lot of flaws in that way of thinking, that it would somehow improve things for that to be the case. Already we've got a, I guess you could say, busted system of, college loans and the financial aspect of college as it is, and to me something like that might even actually make it worse. So it would bring on a whole new set of problems based on that. And and probably quite a few demonstrations in the streets. So there might be some violence and other things that came about from trying to do such a change. Whereas the slow takeover by wealthy elites who concentrate all the power in Washington, that's happened so gradually that a lot of people haven't noticed. Yeah. And okay, the final part was Mike talked about Barack Obama, that he would win in a landslide if we had the Scholarchy. First of all, he won twice without the Scholarchy, so apparently he didn't really need that to win. The current wealthy elites did a good enough job of electing him, without the Scholarchy. But the funny thing is, then we get to the true reason why Mike really wants this, because it's obvious that what he really wants is more liberals in power, and the conservatives are, when he doesn't like them, it's easy to disparage their intellectualism and all this, and basically say, well, if we did it this way, then more liberals would be in charge. The thing is, we've already been going that way anyway in terms of the federal government. We're closer to we're closer to Europe than we ever have been in terms of more and more concentrated federal power, which seems to be what most of the liberals want. If that's what they want, then it's already happening, regardless of whether the people that are voting are higher with college degrees. And that's the last point I wanted to make, is that factually, it's not even really true what he said about that, because I took a look at a bunch of exit polls for 2012, and if we had Mike's system, and again, we can only speculate as to the difference in the electorate based on the change, in terms of, would more people get college degrees, would college people who have degrees be more likely to start paying attention and voting if they felt they had more power. All that's just rampant speculation. But if you had just didn't announce that in advance and just said, okay, 2012, boom, this is in place and there's no advance warning, and we just did the election that way instead, Obama would have still won, but it probably actually would have been by less of a margin, not more of a margin. Because when I looked at the exit polls, he got a huge majority of the uneducated, the people who didn't even graduate high school, the people who graduated high school but didn't have any college experience. Overwhelming majority of that group voted for Obama, whereas people with bachelor's degrees, Romney actually won the majority. Now, people who have advanced, master's degrees, doctors, yes, Obama did win that group by a fairly large margin. But is it enough? Because percentage-wise, the people who voted who had bachelor's degrees versus the people who had the high-end degrees was actually higher. So it depends. I don't remember exactly the formula he had for how much more voting strength you got for having the advanced degree, but it would be fairly close in terms of the shift based on that change. And so, like I said, looking at the data for exit polls, Obama still would have won the election, but it might not have been by a wider margin. It might have actually been by a closer one. So it might have changed the end result, but the idea that somehow, this would have been, there's a whole lot of, highly educated in terms of degrees people who are not liberals, or if they are liberals, don't like Obama's particular brand of liberalism. They liked Romney's kind of vague, wishy-washy, flip-flopping liberalism better than they liked Obama's. So, that's the final point I wanted to make, because it was the final thing Mike said. He did it before the election, so of course he couldn't know what the result was going to end up being. But I think that was part of it, is he was worried that somehow the uneducated masses were going to rise up and put the, super wealthy Romney into office because, he's one of us or something. So anyway, I went a little longer than I anticipated, but I wanted to get all that out and kind of go point by point with this. So to sum up, a big difference, obviously, between SPs and NFs is this NF view of everybody being this collective, and SPs are much more into individual freedom, and so that's already some of the disconnect. But as a general rule, I think NFs tend to have a bigger appreciation for the value that people have inherently, regardless of whether they are good at the specific skills that lead to getting college degrees in the United States. So anyway, if you're out there and you don't have a college degree, but you know more than the stupid dweeb who sits next to you who's got a master's degree, then that's where you put your hand up and you say, "Viva la revolution, down with the Scholarchy, and God bless America." Thank you.